Heather was born Heather Ronalda McGecky at 7 p.m. on Sunday the 21st of January 1923 at Holmesville near Newcastle, New South Wales. She was the second daughter of Eileen and Henry McGecky. She had an older sister, Eileen Jessie, and a younger sister, Mary, who only survived a few hours after birth. This death had a profound and lasting effect on Heather for the rest of her life. Heather's parents were both of Scottish descent. Mother Eileen was Eileen Kell, whose father was a policeman, Henry Ronaldson McGecky, whose father was a mine manager. To use Heather's words from her memories, "I always seemed to be in trouble. One day I was swinging on the open door of the ice chest, and it tipped over with me underneath amongst the butter and the milk and the like." You can imagine how popular I was at the time. Although my poor mother was frantic, and she was sure that I'd be injured or worse. But I escaped without a scratch. I think the fact that I was so small helped. Heather, her parents and sister moved to Cardiff, near Newcastle, in 1926, where they built a home. Heather started school at the age of 5 at St Joseph's School, just a short walk from where they lived. She remembers being insecure, sitting on the chairs as her feet couldn't touch the ground, and also writing on slates with slate pencils instead of paper. Following that, she and her sister attended Cardiff School after they started a bus service. Heather loved school and loved learning. She was always thirsty for knowledge, and this continued right up until she passed. Heather was introduced to music at a very young age by her mother, who was a wonderful classical pianist. Heather used to watch her fingers moving over the keys with fascination and learnt to read music when she was very young and enjoyed singing as well. Her first performance was in her elder sister's school concert. She was just 3 years old. The family moved to Cessnock in 1932 to a little village called Kitchener, about 3 miles from town. Her father worked as a winding engine driver at the local coal mine. Heather always had fond memories of her life in Cessnock. Not long after moving there, she began singing lessons, and this is where she found her calling. Her singing teacher was an opera singer, Donald Douglas, who was also teaching her to conduct a choir. When Donald left Cessnock, she would travel to Newcastle by steam train to Madame La Poutrelle for lessons. Tap dancing was another talent, and she and her friend danced at many concerts. She was, as they say in the industry, a centre stage girl. The banjo mandolin was another instrument she mastered. Following her singing lessons, she went on to win many Eisteddfods, accumulating many trophies by the tender age of 14. This continued through her teenage years and became her great love. She was a soloist with the Cessnock Brass Band. She sang live on Radio 2CK Cessnock and 2HD Newcastle, and following that they cut records of her singing. Heather's sister, Eileen Jessie, and her husband, James, had 5 children, and Heather was very close to her nephews and niece. They were a huge part of her life then and remain so. Another of Heather's great loves was cricket, and at school she played a women's version of the game. She began her love of the game listening to the Invincibles on the radio late at night when they were playing in England. This team featured greats like Don Bradman and Bill O'Reilly. Heather was listening to history in the making. She was never interested in watching the coverage on TV, but always preferred the radio commentary. It was only this summer that she found herself too tired to even listen to her beloved cricket. Another historical event that Heather witnessed was in 1928. She remembered walking to the lookout at Blackbutt Reserve in Newcastle and watching the famous aviator Bert Hinkler fly over. He was at the end of his record flight from England to Australia. He circled around and waved from his open cockpit. Aeroplanes in those days were a wonder, with no radios or means of communication. Whilst in Cessnock, the family bought their first car, a 1923 Dodge Tourer. This enabled them to explore and go mushrooming, swimming in the Wollombi River, and to visit the vineyards. These were the days when you could buy a huge bag of grapes for $1. That's about 10 cents in today's money. Cessnock miners used to gather at Wangi on the shore of Lake Macquarie for annual holidays, and this family was no exception. Heather attended Cessnock High School. When she left school, she taught singing to children and assisted in conducting a children's choir, continuing her love of music. Heather studied at Burroughs Business College, where she learnt the calculating machine. Heather remembered clearly the start of the Second World War. She and her parents were listening to the radio when Winston Churchill and then Australian Prime Minister Robert Menzies announced, "We are at war." Life changed for all, with rationing of some food and many other items. She remembers going into Newcastle and seeing the damage caused by shelling from a Japanese submarine off the coast of Newcastle. Her father was an air raid warden. The war continued while Heather and her parents moved back to Cardiff in 1942. Heather worked at Thomas McPherson's, a shop that sold tools and hardware. She was employed as a comptometer operator, which was a precursor to the modern computer. She later worked at Lysart's on the same type of machine, working out prices for components of the Owen gun, a machine gun invented in Australia and used in the war. Heather attended and was an organist at the Cardiff Presbyterian Church from 1942 to 1945. She and her friends had holidays in the Blue Mountains at Katoomba and a guest house which often had concerts and took part in talent quests. Heather was spotted by a talent scout from the Tivoli Theatre in Sydney. He arranged for her to audition at the theatre, but first she had to sing at the Leichhardt Stadium during a wrestling bout. She sang in interval in the wrestling ring, and she had to climb under the ropes to do it. It was the most unusual place she'd been. And she must have wowed the crowd because the promised audition was arranged. Unfortunately, she couldn't keep the appointment because her throat became inflamed and she needed an operation and couldn't sing for 3 months. During that 3 months, though, Heather met Bernard John Cook. Bernard was in Newcastle on leave from the Royal Navy. He was based at Bankstown Aerodrome, where he assembled and repaired Spitfires for the aircraft carriers of the Royal Navy. Bernard was discharged from the Royal Navy and he and Heather were married on the 20th of October 1945 at St Andrew's Presbyterian Church in Newcastle. On the 18th of August 1946, Heather and Bernard had their firstborn, a daughter, Eileen Blanche, named after both her grandmothers. In Heather's words, she was a delightful child and never got into mischief or caused any worry. Bernard and Heather purchased a home in Main Road, just 2 doors from her parents' home in Cardiff, where Heather lived up until her 70s. She then only moved 200 metres up the road to Linden Grove. On the 3rd of December 1950, Grant Bernard Cook came into the world. In Heather's words, he was a bright, cheerful baby, always smiling and happy. When Grant was 18 months old, Heather and Bernard purchased their first car, a 1939 Standard 10. Heather was keen to drive, so she learned as soon as the car arrived. She continued driving until her eyesight began to deteriorate at the age of 80. Shortly after, Heather and Bernard, along with Heather's mother and father, purchased a block of land at Lake Munmora on the New South Wales Central Coast. The men proceeded to build a small house on the block, which never really got finished. Bernard bought a small sailing boat and Heather had to sew the sails, which turned out to be quite a task considering the fabrics in those days. The family had a very cute dog called Sambo back then. He used to bark every time we crossed the rattly Swansea Bridge. One night he decided to jump out of the Standard 10 and landed straight in the channel below. We all thought he would be gone, but Bernard whistled and Sambo jumped from the water and onto Eileen's lap. Many wonderful times were had at the lake. 26th of April 1957, Glenn James Cook arrived on the scene. Although he was the smallest of Heather's babies, he is now, of course, the tallest. In Heather's words, what a mischievous child he turned out to be. He was hyperactive. There was never a calm moment when he was around. And nothing's changed. Heather and her parents were very involved in the establishment and building of the Cardiff Heights Methodist Church in Main Road, and many fine days and memories were had at the church. On the 10th of August 1961, Heather lost her beloved father Henry. He was only 68 and passed away after an illness of only a week. Heather was very close to her dad and missed him dearly. Following the death, Heather and Bernard constructed a granny flat on the rear of their house where her mother, Eileen McGecky, lived until she died in 1974, aged 78. Heather and Bernard were divorced in 1969, and Heather would have to run the home by herself and provide for the family. She became mother and father to the children. This wonderful woman would make the most of every dollar. She even went to night school to learn woodwork and built the furniture for their home. The same year, Eileen married Roger. Grant had married Janice, and grandchildren were starting to appear. Scott, Tracy, and Sarah. Glenn, being much younger, was still at home with his mum, and the highlights were family gatherings, birthdays, and picnics. It was hard for her when Glenn moved out and married Jo. She was alone for the first time, but the list of grandkids was growing. Amy, Lucas, and Matthew joined the fray. Glenn then married Shirley, and instantly Kirsten, Armin and Chris were loved and cherished by Grandma Cook. As the family grew, her love for all was comforting and generous. In 1991, she realised the building of a new retirement village 200 metres up the road would give her her first new home. She was the very first person to put down her deposit and choose the best unit from the plan. Her grandkids, Lucas and Matt, who were used to living next door, would only have to run up the road for their afternoon tea and favourite movies. Her sister Jessie also moved into a unit in the village. These were happy times for Heather. There were big gatherings of the Osland and Cook clans, but Grandma's organising abilities were not just evident in family circles. She was also instrumental in the Methodist Church choirs at Cardiff Heights. She was an organiser and founding member of the Newcastle Scots Club and the resident representative of the committee at the Linden Grove Retirement Village. She embraced new technology and had a computer in the early stages of their development. She would always be there for other residents of the village to help them and solve problems for them. Granddaughter Kirsten and Barry blessed her with the first great-grandchild, Jimmy, and then they came non-stop with excitement and joy at every arrival. Dustin, Kalia, Hayden, Zach, Taj, Sam, Amelia, Zara, Delilah, Zali, Indy, Armin, Lucy, Daisy, Jonas, Zeb, Otis, and Xavier, all 20, great-grandma's pride and joy. She moved north to the Gold Coast to be close to Eileen, moving into Pines Haven, where she stayed a proud blue amidst a sea of maroons on State of Origin nights. She made so many cherished friends there, residents and staff alike. A very special friend, Gertie, who is now 107, became close with an extra special connection. As Mum's birthdays and Christmases grew in number, sadly her eyesight and mobility diminished, but her mind was still sharp. In another first, the family gave her an iPad for her 90th birthday, and she was immediately connected to Facebook, allowing her to keep in contact with those back home. She continued to love her technology until her eyesight let her down. She moved to Blue Care's Woodlands nursing home while renovations were being done to her room. Daughter Eileen would be there at least 2 days a week taking her shopping, where there was usually a reason to buy a new dress or some shoes. She also loved the coffee shop, where she would meet with friends like Jim and Sharon. Again, at Woodlands, staff and residents would become very close and more like a new family to Heather. These friends would visit her and make her days happier. The staff came to love her, and she loved them back. She would wait in her seat for a phone call from Glenn or Grant, or a visit from any of her beloved family. Macular degeneration had claimed most of her sight, and this became a major frustration for her in her last years. Her mind remained incredibly sharp till the end. She was an avid fan of ABC radio and learnt and remembered so much from listening day and night. In the end, she was so weak she couldn't hold the phone to take those beloved calls, and she knew it was time and God beckoned her. She was fortunate to say her last goodbyes to her beloved family, who were able to share precious memories with her before she passed. We will all miss her very much.
Down and oh my soul so weary, when troubles come and my heart burdened be, then I am still and wait here in the silence until you come and sit a while with me. You raise me up so I can stand on mountains. You raise me up to walk on stormy seas. I am strong